Good evening, thank you for joining us. My name is Todd Salovey. I'm the Associate Artistic Director of San Diego Repertory Theater, and I know why you're all here tonight. What a privilege it is to talk to Hershey Felder, have a conversation with him, and I know you're going to come and see the show tonight, which I know you'll enjoy. First, let me introduce someone who we think of as a virtuoso performer. He is a writer. He is a wonderful pianist. He is an actor, and he writes his plays. He also does his set design. Please welcome Hershey Felder. Hershey's been in residence at San Diego Rep for many of our past seasons. And I want to let you know that as part of the Rep, we're really honored and proud to do your work here. We love the energy that you bring to the theater. You probably know that Hershey's show, Hershey Felder Beethoven, this week has broken all the San Diego Rep box office records. And the record that it broke was the one set by Hershey Felder for Tchaikovsky. What is the connection that you have with San Diego, and why is the Rep a place where you're doing residency?
Well, connection to San Diego is that all the artists who work on the things that we do, they're all from here. All the staff, the director, so on and so forth. When I came here years ago and I began to perform at the other theater in Balboa Park, the other theater, I met a lot of San Diego artists, and I was so taken with the quality of the artwork that I thought it would be a wonderful thing to include these people in the company, in our creative process. And we talked for a while, and then we forged a relationship, and as it turns out, all the productions that are created for the rest of the world are all created here in San Diego. The sets are all built here in San Diego. The designs are all done here in San Diego. All the creative artists are here. And several years ago, when we talked about doing Irving Berlin, I think it was for J-Fest, if I'm not mistaken, for Todd's Jewish Festival, the idea of creating an Irving Berlin show was started because of the family. They'd come to me to do this kind of thing. And the very first performance of that was actually on the stage right behind us. And that has been seen by millions of people all over the world by this point. And that was, I think, the first thing that we did together, was the initial Irving Berlin piece. And ever since then, it struck me how wonderful the Rep is. And wouldn't it be a wonderful place to continue a relationship? And thankfully, the Rep had us back to be able to create new pieces, and so far we created Tchaikovsky, gave its world premiere here. We've rehearsed new pieces. The current piece that's opening in 4 weeks in San Francisco is being rehearsed here and designed here, and Todd and Sam have been very wonderful hosts for our work here, and the audience loves coming down to San Diego Rep, so why not?
Thank you. We love having you here. The vocabulary that you use as a theater artist is so unique. I don't know that anyone does what you do. So you're writing a piece, it's about a great composer, you're playing these remarkably difficult pieces on stage. As you play, you break to speak about them, and then go back to playing them. There's a visual landscape for the show, you're designing it, and you're creating stories that are combining biography, characterization, music, and the telling of the story. How is it that you came up with this vocabulary of theatricality, and have you been developing it over the years that you've been doing it?
Well, to answer the specific need about why I came up with the theatrical vocabulary was I needed a way to pay rent. And, this is now 25 years ago. I was a pianist, or I'm a pianist, and an actor, and that's how I grew up with those two different disciplines. And very much so wanted to join them, but of course, when I started doing these kinds of things, nobody was doing that. And more to the point, people thought it was a foolish, it was a fool's journey to try and even put these two things together. Primarily because they thought that audiences wouldn't be interested, that was one. And the second was that physically, it's such a complicated thing to do. They're two completely different expressions. Acting is a very particular expression that you use your body in certain ways, and playing, a very particular expression, use it a completely different way. And to put those two together took a lifetime of trying to understand. So when you ask if I've developed it over years, I had the idea to do it 25 years ago, started doing it, but didn't understand quite as a craft how to do it by then, and had to develop how to put these two things together to make them actually work. And I think with all these kinds of things, and that one led to another, Gershwin led to Chopin, that led to Beethoven, that led to Brunner, so on and so forth, I was able to actually learn with each character and each demand, the demands of each character. I was able to learn better how to deal with these kinds of storytelling mechanisms, talking and playing and so on and so forth. And as technology developed, I remember our very first Gershwin was done with a very funny little lamp with a piece of, it was an angstrom projector, but it wasn't a projector at all, with a little piece of plastic film that we had to print that would slide into it, and it would be hung at the back of the theater, and most of the time the light would burn through the lamp, and so what you'd see on the stage is Gershwin's face slowly eroding, and all kinds of other things that was, Paris was burning, and all kinds of things, Rhapsody in Blue burnt up, all kinds of fun things would burn up on a regular basis. That's now some 20, 23, 24 years ago, whatever it was. And as technology developed, we were able to do new things with our sets and with our scenography and so on and so forth. So all of this is part of a long continuum of process of understanding this. What is interesting is that I learned the Gershwin role and first played it 22 years ago, 23 years ago. So I guess the original thing was 23, production was 23 years ago. And it's fascinating now that this summer I have to go back to do Gershwin again. I mean, I'm way too old to do it, but they keep on asking. So, you know, when I started this, I was 12 years too young, you know, to do him, because I was playing him at the age of, now he's been dead, you know, in my age range for 12 years, and as the old joke goes, you know, for a man who's been dead that long, you look pretty good. So this year I will play Gershwin again. So how many actors and artists get to actually do the very same production over a period of 23 years? The growth that I've had as an artist is got to inform something like this. And, you know, also how we do the stage technique and so on, the scenography, that's changed over the years. But it's the same words, the same text, the same music, and it's 23 years since I first premiered that character. And he gets a return this summer, so that will be a very interesting thing. So all this, to answer your question simply, is that it is a continuum. It took all this time to actually create all of this, and from each character I learned something else and something new and something different.
You know, it's always feels a little naive when an audience member says, how did you learn all those lines? But I feel like I'm going to ask that question. In the course of a residency, you may be doing 3 different composers. You go to a city, if you look at your calendar for a year, I don't know how many of these pieces you do in a year, but you're doing many of them in the course of a single year. And it's one thing for a songwriter to remember a 5-minute song over the years, but you've got multiple close to 2-hour plays that you're able to do seemingly with 2 days rehearsal, and you come up and do a different performance. How is it that you keep all of these performances fresh and alive for yourself?
Well, the mechanism is well oiled. It's constantly in motion, and the oil is constantly being changed. The brain is constantly working like a vehicle, you know. So I am able, the maintenance is always there. It's not as if all of a sudden I'll do a character and then I'll stop performing or playing altogether or doing my work for the next 6 months and then pull something else out of the hat. Literally, before I came here, I was at Actors Theater of Louisville with Irving Berlin, and I had 2 days to become Beethoven. Now, so what it were is, while I'm doing that on stage in the evening, I'm preparing Beethoven during the day. Now I head off to do the new premiere of Debussy, so while we're doing Beethoven at night, I've just finished rehearsal Debussy for the day. So this is a constant, it's constantly turning. The essence of the character and the knowledge of the material is always there. You know, once it's in the brain, it's there. But making sure that the mechanism works so that it's well-oiled, takes the rehearsal time to bring it back and so on. And then I go on stage. But the point is, I'm always on stage, I'm always playing 320 some odd days a year, so there's never a point where it just falls flat and I have to find it from zero. And once you have that mechanism of where you really study and memory and so on and so forth, it is a little bit like riding a bike, a little, because you have to bring it back a great deal. It's a little bit like riding a bike when it comes to a marathon, you know. You know how to ride the bike, but in order to prepare for the marathon, you have to constantly work, and so that's a little bit what goes on all the time.
Like great artists who make it look easy, it's the product of a lot of work. I was so shocked to come in. I knew you were in the theater working on Beethoven. I assumed you were teching Beethoven for performance that week. And I walk into the theater and Hershey is on the piano in the lobby running lines and music for his next Debussy piece. It's just working all the time.
It's all you're working all the time, and you divide your day and you figure out how it works and how to manage your time and your brain and your physicality and so on and so forth. It's constant.
So 11 years ago, you began performing Beethoven, created the piece, and we've talked about that this is an updating of the Beethoven piece. What did you start with, and what is it now?
The essence of the story is the same. The conceit is the story of the same. It's told from a perspective of a young boy who knew Beethoven very well. When he was 12 to 14 years old, he was Beethoven's best friend's son. And he left a memoir about what happened in those 2 years where he cared for Beethoven. And I started with that conceit then, and I kept that conceit now, although in the interim, I discovered so much more about the story and what was surrounding it that I thought would be very interesting. And I was able to bring that new material into the conceit that was the original conceit. Also, as time went on, I learned, like with anything, how to better tell a story. And because I've learned how to better tell a story, all the elements that in the beginning were sort of there have now been brought forth a little bit better. You know, but that's the work of the artist. Nothing is there the first time, the first effort. The process is a very long one. And one of the joys that I've had, one of the miracles that I've had with my life and my work and our team is that I never have to stop working. It's never ever finished. It's always can develop. I can always look at something new and figure out how to make it better. And because I get to revisit these things, even like Gershwin 25 years later, I can always look at how I can make something better. And so it's active, constant creation.
It's very rare in the American theater for an artist to get to do a role multiple times. And most plays that are done, they're done once. Maybe they're done a second time. So to be able to work and develop a piece over a course of decades is extremely unusual of artists in the theater. With Beethoven, well, with this piece, how did you build it? What is the research process that you do? And then I have a question about the thing I marvel at is where the music takes place in the story. And you've seen many musical reviews, something like that, where there's like dialogue song, and yet when I watch your work, I always ask myself, what's the song doing in the narrative or in the emotion? How did you develop that with Beethoven?
Well, the thing about all these musicians and all these composers is they had very clear intentions about what they were trying to say in their compositions. Sometimes they're a little bit elusive, like in the case of Chopin. He's trying to say something, and he often said, what I'm trying to say is for you to figure out and for me to know, kind of thing. And every time you will hear it, it will sound like something different. In the case of Beethoven, it's less that he's more literal, it's that he's constantly dealing with the human condition in some form or other, in whatever he composes. It's important to differentiate, in this case, the difference between program music, or Programmmusik, and just descriptive music and so on. He's not a program music person, except for like the Pastoral Symphony, you know, where he clearly makes a note, and now everybody wakes up, and now they're going to the farm, and now they're doing these kinds of things. Description in music, and most composers don't appreciate those kind of things. They think that music stands for something much bigger than just a daily description of activity and so on and so forth. In the case of Beethoven and how to tell the narrative, I always start with looking at all the music that is related to the story that I'm telling. In this case, if the little boy who's telling the story, his experience with Beethoven relates to particular music, I will look at the particular titles that he dealt with in terms of his relationship with Beethoven. Then I will look at how those pieces, color-wise, fit into the narrative themselves. So if you have a piece that really denotes a sad state of emotion, can that fit, and so on and so forth. Once we have the pieces and more or less the kind of story that we're going to tell, then we actually put it on stage and we very clearly understand when a piece advances the story and not. So if we found a piece that fits into the narrative in title, but as you play it out, it doesn't quite advance the story, or it repeats itself too much or something like that, the piece has to emotionally advance the story. In a case like Irving Berlin, it's very easy because the lyrics advance the story. And you know, I'm sure you have all gone to plays, musical plays, where you hear some of the pieces and the lyrics don't advance the story. They kind of, how shall we say, list songs, or you say tomato, I say tomato. You get the whole joke right there at the first time, and it's a moment rather than advancing the story. I can't afford that. I don't have any place as a one-person, one-man band on show doing telling the story for the audience to actually have music that stops in its tracks and doesn't do anything. So everything that has to be in the script has to be in the music, and it has to advance. And you only find that out by doing. You find that out by, sometimes we'll have to put pieces in and we'll say, you know, this doesn't quite work. But we've tried it, and another piece, oh, this does work much better. We'll put the shift them back and forth. And so it's about trial and error, but it always is about storytelling. It can never ever sit there on the stage like a Lux and not tell, you know, and not tell a story. It's always got to continue, and finding that is difficult. And there's no magic trick. You have to try, and you have to figure out what works.
When you say try, is it something you're doing before the audience comes in, or are you learning from the way the audience responds?
Well, in the early days, you know the moment you try something in front of a crowd, what's going to work and not. You try it in front of the crowd, and if it sits there like a Lux, it sits there. You can feel it. You feel, as you know, as a director yourself, you know that when you're doing scenes or whatever it is you're doing, if the story is not advancing and the audience is not quite with you, you get that sense immediately. There's a certain kind of tension that happens between an artist and an audience on a stage that I can feel if we're going along together or if you're completely lost. And if we're not going along together, then whatever the material is on the page has to be verified, looked at as to why it's not working. And that's one of the luxuries, one of the greatest luxuries of doing this with a small team, one-man show and so on, is that if something is not working, for a second performance, I can immediately shift. I don't have big rehearsals with other audience, you know, with things, you know, to put in a new scene and to make the curtain drop out.
New choreography.
We don't need to do that. Right away, the storytelling. So one of the things that have been very successful with these kind of pieces is that because the storytelling is king, everything is guided by whether the audience can grasp and come along on the story, and if it's being clear or if it's not. And that's what makes a great difference in being able to put these pieces together, and also the continuum over the years that allow me to develop these things with my greatest partners in the world, which is, of course, the audience. The audience knows everything. What I dislike reading, and you see this in a lot of, you know, criticisms, and not my stuff in particular, just in general, is, oh, well, yeah, but the comment on the audience. Well, the moment a critic insults the audience, oh, they're too stupid, they don't get it, they're too this, they're too that, they're wrong. An audience as a collective is the most powerful source of criticism that you can have. You'll have individuals who like, who don't like, but an audience as a whole, if they're there and they can follow the story, then things are okay.
Your work is so rooted in storytelling. Is that something that's been in your life since you were young? Did you have stories told to you? Were you taken by storytelling? Where did this relationship to live storytelling come from?
I think live storytelling comes a great deal from, historically, I come from a family of Holocaust survivors, you know, who came here with absolutely nothing, and to North America with zero. You know, most of life was taken away. The word that I grew up with was, they disappeared. The word disappeared. And so when people and lives and elements of life just completely disappear, when you come somewhere, what do you have? You only have your words, your memories, your stories. And so I grew up in a family where that's all that there was the storytelling. And so to me, this is the basis of what makes life, the basis of what makes theater, it's everything, you know, is that we all have our little stories. And so to me, storytelling is a natural way to keep life going. Otherwise, you know, nothing exists, which is what I saw. You know, without the stories that my ancestors or my grandparents, it's not even ancestors per se, it's just the generation before me, parents and grandparents were able to tell, there would be nothing, because according to them, everything before that just disappeared, quite literally, in thin air.
That's very moving. In the play you're doing on stage, there's some reference to the relationship between Beethoven and Mozart. Can you tell what you discovered about how they interacted with each other and what Mozart meant to Beethoven?
Mozart meant a great deal to Beethoven in that he was in the line of the great composers. I think Beethoven wanted to take Mozart's language of music a little bit further. Certainly the music of Haydn he wanted to take much further. But Mozart, he understood how Mozart was a genius and how Mozart was gifted by God, in that that essence that Beethoven considered the voice of God. You know, he said the same thing of Schubert, he said the same thing of Bach. In particular, Beethoven's real fanatic appreciation was for Handel, which most people don't play nowadays, you know, in sort of just a general concerts. Of course, it's played in music and so on and so forth. But Handel to Beethoven was considered the most godlike composer. I find that to be fascinating. And looking at some of the music of Handel, you understand why. But he's not popular in the sense that, how shall we say, that Beethoven is popular, in the sense that Mozart is popular. And so Beethoven's relationship with all these composers is that they created worlds that he drew from, and they created worlds that he understood and was able to build on. And the intimate relationship in terms of meeting him, well, you know, what exactly happened between them we'll never know.
Beethoven had a disability, began losing his hearing, and by the end of his composing couldn't hear at all. What do you think, how was he able to continue to compose with probably the worst disability for a composer to have?
Well, I think the worst disability for a composer to have is a lack of imagination. You know, so that's the one thing that he had in spades, which is an imagination. He understood, of course, how notes work together, and he understood the essence of what sound creates and what it does and so on and so forth. The thing about Beethoven was not, for me, how he could compose or could not compose, because he understood technically how to do it, is that he could never sit in an audience and just enjoy, like the rest of us, the music that he composed. He could never feel it viscerally, or maybe he could, but not in the way that we do, not in the way that we experience it. And that's been a very interesting thing to try and understand. It was recently, probably last year, maybe last year, a couple of years ago, I don't know, I saw this thing on YouTube. It's worth it to check out. It's on this X Factor show, you know, the one with all the talent. It was an X Factor or America's Got Talent, one of these shows. A young lady gets up with a ukulele or a guitar or something like this, and she's completely deaf. And she sings a song that she composed that is perfectly in tune and beautifully rendered, extremely musical, with a voice that sings like a bird. You know, rhythmically, she's all in the right place, and she's how she does. It's miraculous. It's almost freaky to watch, because you begin to understand what Beethoven was going through. And you know, they asked her, how do you do that? She says, well, I remember the placement. She would have had to hear exactly where the notes go, exactly. And she lost her hearing maybe because of a virus, maybe at 12 years old. I don't remember exactly the story. Anyway, but it's a freaky thing to watch, because you get the sense that you're watching what it must have been like for Beethoven, somebody to be such an elevated musician and yet at the same time, you know, be able to produce that kind of music.
Yeah, we have a question in the audience.
Yes, I have a question. Beethoven, from my little bit of reading, was profoundly deaf by the first symphony.
That's not correct. He was not profoundly deaf by the first symphony. He was profoundly deaf by the end of his career.
By the ninth?
By the ninth. Profoundly. We couldn't hear anything.
Okay.
But it took decades to get there. Mm-hmm.
And did they have sign language then, or was it, I mean, all written?
In
How did
terms of
he live his
how
life?
did he communicate? In terms of how he communicated in general with the people he wanted to communicate with. That's a great thing about, if he didn't want to communicate, sorry, can't hear you. You know, but if he wanted to communicate, it was generally with conversation books that have now been torn apart and spread all over the world and so on and so forth. But you don't know what he says because he doesn't write his answer, but you know what he's been asked. So you can understand some of the conversation because they would write for him and then he would respond speaking, largely. We also know from his letters, you know, communication skills and so on and so forth. But he removed himself a great deal from society. I mean, he didn't go out and sign on the streets and so on and so forth. And for a good period of time, he used ear trumpets and all kinds of things until it got to the point where he accepted that it was completely deaf, and it was in conversation books that he communicated.
So Hershey, aside from rehearsing a play you're about to do, or working on a new piece of theater, or watching America's Got Talent, what do you do when you're not on stage?
Prepare for being on stage. That's really it. Sometimes I have conversations with lovely people who are coming to see a show. This is a kind of life, you know, people think it's glamorous, oh, it's fun, and, you know, you go do fun things, and you go out late for coffees, and you visit with your friends, and you get up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you sort of meander over to the theater. That's not it at all. I'm up at 6 in the morning, I'm working on various projects before I have to get to the theater. I'm usually here, you see, you know, 9 o'clock. This is on a performance day, and I'm already rehearsing, and it's every day like this. This is not something that's, you know, kind of a pastime. It's every day, it's work every day. There's very little glamour in it. It's a tremendous amount of work. I pride myself in being very serious about that work. And I take it very seriously because the audience comes and so on and so forth. But a regular day really is more about how can I manage all the things that need to get done for the practice and rehearsals and so on and so forth, as opposed to it. And then at night, I put on my little briefcase, I finish up, you know, I take my briefcase and I head home. Sometimes I'll pass by a market to make sure I have something to eat in the morning, and I'll get into bed with my computer, work for another hour and a half, and I'm up at 6. It's like this every day. When I get to be home for extended periods, which is 10 days if I'm lucky, there I will sometimes get up and go for a walk and do things that don't. But here, if it's some work, and if it's in the United States and I'm doing it, it's just always work. It's just the way it is.
Where is home?
Home is both, well, it's generally where I am, which is,
besides that,
you know, the dog lives in Europe, so the dog is there. You know, it's like my wife says, we bought him a house and we visit him from time to time, you know. Well, that's a little bit what it's like, but, you know, I mean, a home is, it's really in a theater. It's where I go, it's where I have to work and so on.
Do you ever go into the school system? Do you ever do anything to educate our youth, whether it's in high school or in the college level or elementary?
Do I ever do anything to educate youth in high school or elementary? And actually many levels of that. Not only do I go into schools, but even a music competition has been created in my name. Well, no, that's not quite it. A music competition was created that bears my name because I am the sponsor of the thing. These events have been, we've done these shows. One of the things that I tend not to do is go into schools, but bring schools to us, for the simple reason that going into school is a nice way to, you know, say I did something. However, but bringing students to us, whether it be gratis or support us or so, and then spending time with them, and I've done a lot of this in theaters all over the country, and when I do those kind of projects, we give them the full play. So it's not just come visit for 3 minutes, I'll do 3 scenes. In general, I'll talk them through what it is I'm doing, then I'll show them in backstage and do all those kinds of things. And then we'll talk about storytelling, and most of the time I'll create the character in front of them, get dressed, do all the things right in front of them. And then have open discussions with the students as to what interests them and so on and so on. So yes, it's a huge part of what we do, but I don't just go do, you know, 2 or 3 visits and say I've done it. It's a constant educational quest that I'm on.
Hershey, I want to give you time to prepare for your performance, but one more question. What's next, and when can we enjoy it?
What's next and when we can enjoy it? Well, next will be Debussy that opens in Mountain View in Palo Alto in 4 weeks, I think, in 3 weeks or something like this. And that will go on tour with all the rest of the shows throughout the year, and it will be here next season in May or something.
May 7 until June 7. Right now, the only way to get it is to subscribe to our season, but tickets will be available, single tickets later on. But go to the Rep's website and you'll find out about what's coming up. We have a whole month residency of Hershey's newest piece. What's the title of it?
A Paris love story. And it's a very romantic kind of thing. So I look forward to sharing that with you. And if it's time, I think I probably should get dressed. Otherwise, this won't suit for Beethoven.
That doesn't work for Beethoven. Hershey Felder, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.